Hello, I'm trendy clickbait garbage, and today I want to talk about Stranger Things Season 3, and none of you can stop me. My whole dang video is going to have spoilers for the season, and probably the other seasons. Go watch it, or don't. I don't care. Stranger Things is a show about what if it was the 80s, but also monsters. I love the show. I think it's pretty much made for me. I love the weird Spielbergian kids movie adventure vibe. I love the B horror movie references it wears on its sleeves. I think the characters are great, mostly. I think the action is well done and exciting, and I think the music friggin' slaps. I mentioned that I really like the show up front because I'm only going to be complaining about it from here on out. And I know it's turn your brain off style entertainment, and I definitely did watch and enjoy it on that level. But I think it's possible to find harmful or downright insidious messages in pop culture that you otherwise like. Plenty of people like the works of H.P. Lovecraft, and I don't think I gotta tell you, that dude had some fucked up ideas about black people and whether or not they are secretly fish. Stories have an emotional impact if they're told well, whether or not they have bad messages in them. You can still be affected by a story even if you think it has gross or bad themes. Some of my favorite movies have some dog shit latent messaging in them. Ghostbusters is essentially about presenting deregulation as important to the natural balance of the universe, but it also has a slime boy in it, so you gotta like it for that. Most of the movies I watch for fun are weird slashers from the 80s, and a lot of ink has been spilled explaining why they have some fucked up gender politics. The ending of Sleepaway Camp, for example, relies on you taking it for granted that being trans would turn you into a murderer. I'm not telling you you're not allowed to enjoy Stranger Things. I enjoy Stranger Things. I'm not here to be a lefty prude telling you how everything you love is problematic. I just think the show unconsciously projects some highly liberal bullshit, and I think it's worth examining why I think that might be. And I bet you think you know what I'm going to talk about. The bad guys in this season are Soviets. This show has an anti-communist bias. I don't give a fuck. I can't imagine why anyone on Earth would. Even if you like the Soviet Union, weirdo, it doesn't exist anymore. Do you think Stranger Things Season 3 is what's keeping people from embracing the immortal science of Marxism-Leninism? There's a certain take circulating about this development that I think is wildly overblown. People argue that since socialism is getting popular, the establishment is responding by putting anti-communist propaganda in our pop culture. I don't really think that's what happened here. I mean, sure, the Soviets on Stranger Things are clearly doing something bad. They kill one scientist for no reason. I guess that's pretty bad. Beyond that, everything the Soviets do in the show is something that the American government did in previous seasons. The opening shots of the season actually deliberately toy with this, by showing a secret government compound doing some sort of scientific experiment to open up the mold and monsters dimension. And then, surprise, it's the Soviets. You thought it was the Americans, but the Soviets are doing the same dang thing. They invade the United States, sort of, I guess, which is a little rich, considering in real life, the Americans invaded the Soviet Union and not vice versa. But they don't seem interested in, taking over or killing people or anything. They just want to do science with the mold and monsters dimension, which, granted, is a bad idea, but isn't any more evil than the Americans. If they wanted to make the show anti-socialist, they'd probably throw in a line where one of the Soviets is like, "Soon we will have the means to crush the Americans." I can't do a Russian accent, so I just decided he was Dracula. What I'm trying to say is this show isn't very subtle. Look what happens when they try to write product placement without you noticing.
How do you even drink that?
Because it's delicious.
What?
It's like Carpenter's The Thing. The original is the classic. No question about it. But the remake? Sweeter, bolder, better.
No, I'd like to present a much simpler explanation for why the bad guys are Soviets this season. It's because the bad guys in 80s movies were Soviets, and that's literally all the thought that was put into it. They literally reference Red Dawn and Rocky IV in-universe. This show is not subtle. If I had to make a guess into series creators the Duffer Brothers' political views based on what I've seen in Stranger Things, I'd say they're the type of vaguely progressives who call themselves apolitical. Stranger Things, like all art, makes political statements, but it is my sincere belief that the D-Boys and other series writers do not recognize them as such. The ideology of the show is unconscious. It doesn't seem to be something they willfully inject. It's just something they can't seem to avoid because they don't really know that they are putting an ideology in the show. Take, for example, the sanitized way that the show handles race. There are 2 instances where the show presents Lucas, the sole person of color in its principal cast, until season 3, as in any way affected by racism. When his friends insist that he has to be Winston, the black Ghostbuster, when they dress as the Ghostbusters for Halloween, which is presented as a comic relief bit, and it's not, because every kid obviously wanted to be Slimer, the sweet slime boy. And when Billy, the human monster, later turned monster, the show is not subtle, is directly and openly racist to Lucas. Now, I don't think it's unrealistic that an otherwise shitty person would also be racist, but having that as the sole example of racism in your television show, set in the American Midwest in the 1980s, suggests that racism isn't a systemic problem in Hawkins, and therefore the nostalgic version of the United States you've imagined. It's just the moral fault of individual people. In this case, the worst dude in town, who you're supposed to hate anyway, so why not also make him the only racist in town? This scene essentializes racism. People watching the scene get to give themselves a little pat on the back. You're not like Billy, so you're not racist. You never have to think about your complicity in larger systems of oppression and domination, because you personally don't openly and consciously hate people based on race, which is the only thing that can possibly be racist. If you've ever told someone that something they were saying had an unconscious racist connotation, and they snap back, no, it couldn't be, it can't be, it's not racist, because I'm not racist, I know I'm not racist, it's because of scenes like this, and the message they send. Now I can see the thought process that led them to this choice. They wanted to establish Billy as a shitty dude, and also, maybe as a bonus, send the message that racism is a shitty thing, for shitty people. They didn't decide that their show should present racism as an individual moral failure rather than a systemic network of domination. That was just their starting assumption, and it filtered into what they were writing. It's possible, however, that maybe the writers of this episode do consciously believe that racism is an individual moral failure and not the result of systemic oppression. Maybe they did intend to send that message, but once again, this is what happens when Stranger Things writers try to write subtly so that you won't consciously recognize the message they're trying to send.
Sweeter, bolder, better.
Let's not give them too much credit here. In Season 3, though, there is one political theme that I do think was consciously inserted. And what's more, I think it was consciously inserted by the Duffer Bros specifically. In one scene, the characters Nancy and Jonathan have just been fired from their job at the local newspaper, and they have an argument. To give you the context, Nancy has been investigating a story about monster rats going nuts and eating poison chemicals, and the newspaper doesn't want her to do it because she's not a reporter there, and they don't want her to be because she's a woman, they don't take her seriously. And Jonathan tries to persuade her to drop it because he's scared of getting fired, but Nancy convinces him to come along on her investigations, which result in an old lady being sent to the hospital, and both of them are fired. Now, the old lady and several of the other people involved in this situation are being mind-controlled by a gibbering mass of alien goo. It's not really relevant to the point I want to make, though. So anyway, they're driving home, and Jonathan is upset at Nancy because she got him fired, and she tells him he doesn't know what it's like being a woman in the working world, and he responds that he comes from a very poor background, and without this job and the opportunities it would give him, it'll be difficult for him to provide for his family. She comes from a relatively well-off family, and she doesn't understand what it's like for him either. Now you might hear that and say, oh, well, they both make some good points, but the thing is, we're only meant to sympathize with Nancy in this scene. She goes home and gets a big pep talk from her mom and encouraged to keep going, even if nobody believes in her, because she's just so friggin' strong. In case that wasn't clear enough, Jonathan later apologizes and admits he was completely wrong about everything, and Nancy was right the whole time. And I get what they're going for here. Jonathan is forced to confront his own privilege and his complicity in the sexism of his coworkers, to learn to believe his partner when she tells him that she's being treated badly in ways that are largely invisible to him as a man. That's great stuff. Love that. Good job. Thing is, though, Nancy's not really forced to confront her privilege. She didn't really need this job. She could have fallen back on something else, but Jonathan didn't have that luxury. She just completely dismisses that and is never forced to reconcile the fact that her boyfriend, who supported her in her reckless choices, albeit reluctantly, was hurt by her inability to consider how her actions would affect him. He specifically tells her he's afraid to be fired multiple times, and she just waves that off. And then she gets him fired, and that kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It's essentially saying that we should ignore class in the face of institutionalized sexism. You think it's hard being poor? Try being a woman, pal. Which kind of sucks, because, women can be poor too. And poverty compounds sexism. It's significantly harder to be a poor woman than a middle-class woman. But also, even if poverty were just a male issue, it's possible to care about the distinct ways in which two groups of people suffer at the same time. The fact that sexism is bad does not, in and of itself, excuse classism against men. The same way that the fact that racism is bad wouldn't excuse sexism against white women. Is Jonathan right in this scene? No, he fucks up for sure. He very clearly tells Nancy she should have dropped it and goes to bat for their sexist bosses. But that doesn't change the fact that he also has a point about Nancy being blind to the economic realities he faces. I'm not mad that Jonathan apologized, but I'm a little annoyed that Nancy never really apologizes for her mistakes, leaving the audience with a distinct impression that Jonathan's concerns about feeding his family aren't really as important as Nancy's concerns. It's not like Nancy saying, "Hey, I got caught up in the story and lost sight of how my actions affected you, so I too am sorry, to you," would in any way cheapen the feminist message the show is trying to get across. It would, in fact, strengthen the characterization of Nancy they've been building this season as single-minded and endlessly determined in pursuit of a story. Instead, the only thing Nancy apologizes for is for comparing him to the other shittier dudes at the office. A comparison he earned by doing the same shitty thing that they did and not taking her seriously. That actually does undermine the sexist message of the show. Because, no, Jonathan, you're not responsible for the sexist thing you did because you are not essentially a sexist person, and thus, you're better than the other essentially sexist dudes, no matter what you do. Just forget the fact that you might have cost his family a large part of their livelihood, Nancy, and then summarily dismissed his concerns as an Oliver Twist routine. The real problem is that you might have hurt his delicate feelings by implying he's more sexist than he actually is. This scene is, technically speaking, pure horse apples, and I place the blame squarely at the feet of those dastardly Duffer Bros, even though they didn't write or direct the episode where the argument happened. Let me explain why I think that. Stranger Things isn't really a period piece in the traditional sense. Sure, it takes place in the past, and sure, there's great pains taken to convey that through costuming and sets and endlessly talking about contemporary pop culture detritus. But it doesn't really use its setting to comment in any way on the history of the times it portrays. The show is mostly about fondly looking back to the dumb garbage we liked in the 80s, and making us remember what we felt like when we were young and didn't have actual problems. It's crystallized nostalgia. The 80s are presented as carefree and fun for everybody. Forget the crack epidemic and subsequent brutalization of largely black communities done under the banner of the war on drugs. Forget the AIDS crisis. Forget the entire Reagan administration. But remember Atari? Remember the way Taco Bell's logo used to look? Remember that? Do you remember the GoBots? As such, the show largely avoids focusing on the ways that the past sucked for a lot of people. I mentioned the way that the show handles, or rather, decides not to handle race earlier, but there's precisely one queer character on the show, and she reveals this to exactly one person who reacts with perfect acceptance and understanding immediately. Another character is coded queer a little bit, but it's left purposefully ambiguous. Now, I'm not saying the show has to focus on LGBTQ plus misery, but it would be nice if they acknowledged that the childhoods of queer people in that era weren't as easygoing and carefree as their straight contemporaries. To maybe just note that the time period they are uncritically celebrating had some dark shit going on under the surface. They don't do that, though. Do you remember the GoBots? So why then the sudden focus on feminism in Season 3? Why was Nancy's mother, a nothing character whose most notable scene prior to this season was when she gets seduced by a minor, suddenly a font of strength from which Nancy drew the power to resist the close-minded men of the world? Why is Mike, who had been the protagonist in previous seasons, given nothing to do but agonize back and forth about his possessiveness? He has to learn that 11 doesn't belong to him, which he never really seemed to believe. But it's a good message, I guess, so whatever. Don't get me wrong, the show has always had capable women. Nancy, for example, defied gendered expectations by being the protector of the group with her amazing shoddy skills as far back as Season 1. There's also a lot of subtext to be read into how everybody just dismisses Joyce's point of view all the time, even though she's always right no matter how crazy she seems. Season 3 actually nails this part, with Joyce just saying, fuck it, and demanding that everybody listen to her when she sees spooky shit. Listen, you meatheads! My magnets fell off my fridge. There's clearly a monster. We live in a town where there's a monster every year. It's another monster. Just get on my level. But the show has always allowed these themes to emerge organically. It's never been didactic about showing strong women. What could have happened to have made them feel like they had to be more explicit about their feminism? Why did they feel the need to show what allies they are and how empowering their characters are? Last season, those dastardly Duffs got themselves mired in a couple of controversies that you might have heard about. A crew member accused them of verbal abuse towards multiple women on set, yelling at them, insulting them, and even threatening them. The D-Boys responded to these allegations with the following. We're deeply upset to learn that someone felt uncomfortable on our set. Due to the high-stress nature of production, tempers occasionally get frayed, and for that, we apologize. However, we think it's important not to mischaracterize our set, where we believe strongly in treating everyone fairly, regardless of gender, orientation, race, religion, or anything else. Sorry you felt uncomfortable when we threatened random women on set, but I'll have you know, you're wrong. We're actually super cool and treat everybody really nice. Cool apology. They also set up an actor who was a minor to receive an unscripted kiss without her consent.
It was not written in the script. The kiss was not written in the script. I get there the first day of filming The Snowball. Me and Noah are like walking in, like seeing the decorations and stuff. One of you, I forgot, I think it was you, Ross, you say like, oh, Sadie, you ready for the kiss? I'm like, what? No, no, that's not in the script. That's not happening. And so the whole day I was like stressed out. You know, I was like, oh my God, wait, am I gonna have to?
Wow, is it that bad? You were stressed out the whole day. Okay.
No, I was like, wait, like, is it gonna happen? Is it not? And it didn't happen that day, but then the second day of filming The Snowball.
Yeah, but you reacted so strongly to this. I was just joking. And you just you were so freaked out that I was like, well, I gotta make her do it now.
Do it now.
That's what happened.
That's why it's my fault.
That's why I'm saying it's your fault. And
I don't think I need to explain why it's fucked up, to say the least, to teach children, literal children, that they should be cool with random kisses given without their consent at their workplace. So that's two controversies where the showrunners come off as sexist douchebags. But I doubt they see themselves that way. Look at the cool and strong female characters they write into the show. They're not like the bad individuals who are sexist. They don't want to be associated with the caricature they have in their mind for what sexism looks like. Quite a pickle. How are you going to get out of this one, D-boys? Now imagine that you're a very bad writer, and you want to make it clear to everybody that you're not sexist. How do you do that? Well, one really ham-fisted way to do that, but also, the only way you can think of, is have a woman directly state to the audience that men don't understand the hardships that women face. But then you have the man say something like, well, I got problems too, lady. But it's not the same thing. Men don't get it. It's just that the unimportant non-problem they chose was poverty. And that shows a blind spot that I think a lot of liberals have. Liberals tend to recognize some forms of oppression, but overlook others. And I don't think a critique of sexism is complete without acknowledging the ways that capitalism compounds sexism and makes it more dangerous for women. Cosmetic companies, for example, are notorious for making women feel shittier about their appearance so they can sell them various creams and salves. Rigid gender roles are enforced, exacerbated, and literally invented by selling each product in two different colors, one for girls and one for boys. Usually, the girls' one costs more. But weirdly, the only time capitalism is even discussed in a whole season about fighting communists comes when a little girl, an African-American little girl no less, extols its virtues because she's entrepreneurial enough to scam free ice cream out of a couple of dipshits.
You know what I love most about this country? Capitalism. Do you know what capitalism is?
Yeah.
It means this is a free market system, which means people get paid for their services depending on how valuable their contributions are. And it seems to me, my ability to fit into that little bit is very, very valuable to you all. So, you want my help? This USS Butterscotch better be the first of many.
Other characters make some limp critiques of capitalism. There's a major subplot about how the monolithic shopping mall is crushing local businesses. There's an exchange where a character explains that the heart of America is rich people scamming poor people out of their money, but he says it like lovingly. Like, isn't that fun? Just go with it. And the other guy is delighted. But the only person who has any sort of strong opinion either way economically happens to be an African-American little girl, a person at the exact intersection of groups in the United States harmed the most by capitalism. A lifetime of making 61 cents on the dollar compared to your white male counterparts makes that ice cream she got literally cold comfort. Hey, Thought Slime, you big-time racist, are you saying black women can't be conservative? No, of course they can. But Erica isn't real. She's written by two white men, and probably other people on staff, I guess, but they have final say over her character direction and this type of stuff she does. And I think that's tone-deaf in a way that they absolutely cannot recognize. Liberals like to present social ills as the result of bad actors. Ultimately, the systems in place and the powers that be are acting in our best interest, and all we have to do is hold them accountable to the existing rules, and everything will work itself out. Small changes can be made here and there as necessary, but ultimately, it's these systems and structures that protect us from bad individuals. That's why they have no real solution when bad individuals get control over these structures, and spoiler alert, they always do eventually. Jonathan and Nancy shouldn't be arguing. Their interests align in that the oppressive structures that harm Nancy as a woman are the very same ones that harm Jonathan as a poor person. These aren't conflicting perspectives, they're two sides of the same coin. Anything done to benefit one group inherently benefits the other. Remember the GoBots? Do you remember the GoBots? They're like bad Transformers. Hey, thanks for watching my video. Look at all these pretty little cartoons. Boy howdy, wouldn't you like to get a cartoon? Well, you can. All you gotta do is go to patreon.com/thoughtslime and await further instructions. That's the place people can go to where they can give me money to make YouTube videos, and then I spend that money at my discretion. Also, you can like and subscribe, why don't you? Why don't you like and subscribe? You got nothing to lose. You don't have a limited amount of likes or subscriptions that you can spend in a day. Just go hog wild, like the video, subscribe to me. Prove to yourself that you're alive. You have choices in this world. I know I haven't been live streaming lately. I'm gonna get back to it. I normally live stream every 8 p.m. on Thursdays, Eastern Standard Time. Why do all the scientists want to get into the Upside Down? It doesn't seem like there's anything good in there, and it keeps letting monsters out. Why do they want that? Are all governments just pro-monster for some reason? Are major world governments just like in favor of letting monsters out of portals. I mean, literally, not I do believe that figuratively, but I don't think they do like it at all.